Hello everyone and welcome to Mackintosh'S Retro Game Room, the show that looks at the underrated, alternative, strange and bizarre video game genres that exist from gaming's past. On the show today I'll be looking at two survival horror titles that many people feel just don't live up to the most obvious comparisons, Resident Evil and Silent Hill. These top tier titles are probably the ones people talk about whenever the word survival horror is brought up. However, on this channel I do things a little bit differently, so whilst it would be easy for me to do a review on both of these games and tell you how brilliant they are, well, I'm not going to do that. You certainly don't need me to tell you how good and immersive most of the games in the two biggest franchises are, and how influential they've been to many video game developers and fans across the world. It's always the same whenever something good comes out, like a movie or a video game that does things a little differently and manages to captivate an audience. Once it becomes a million seller, the most natural thing to do is to replicate it. So many others try and take the new established formula which reinvented the wheel and go on to try and put their own spin on it. Survival horror is no different. After RE and Silent Hill redefined and in some cases enhanced the survival horror franchise, video game developers wanted their own piece of the action and tried to build upon what Capcom and Konami had already implemented, which was dark, scary corridors, nightmarish creatures and protagonists who were so out of their depth and in a situation that they had nothing to do but survive. So what was there left to build upon after these two successful games? Well, not a lot. You see, Resident Evil and Silent Hill had done too well, and it became a challenge to try not to replicate them too much, but sometimes this is unavoidable, as Joe Public had got used to tank controls, underground labs, haunted mansions, deadly greenhouses and dark alleyways full of zombies, and of course adding those static camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds and of course a slew of deadly weapons to be able to weld. After these games come out, it became necessary for developers to really think and try a lot harder to turn survival horror on its head by coming up with some new and original ideas which would allow them to add in some of the same mechanics which had worked in the top two games at that time. Today we are going to take a look at two survival horror titles that came out a few years after and literally a year apart from each other. Firstly, we're going to take a look at the fourth installment of the Alone in the Dark franchise, The New Nightmare, which was a 2001 release from newcomers Darkworks, who unfortunately only made two games before going bust in 2011. And we're going to have a look at Parasite Eve 2, which came out in 2000 from Squaresoft, which was an interesting blend of survival horror mixed with incredible RPG elements. Now, speaking of Alone in the Dark, I had never played any of the previous games in the series, but I do know how influential they were and actually inspired Capcom to try and come up with a 3D style game that would allow the character to move freely, but never be sure as to what was around the corner. Well, they do say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so Darkworks, who did not work on the first three titles, were hired to reboot Alone in the Dark and bring it to the modern day, whilst also drawing inspiration from not only the previous games, but of course the established forerunners of the survival horror genre. Parasite Eve 2, however, was a game that I bought back in the day, and again, like Alone in the Dark, imitates much of what worked before, but adds in a real-time battle system allowing your character to level up after defeating creatures, equip armour, learn spells a la Final Fantasy, and buy and sell weapons. A very clever system indeed, and one in which I think survival horror purist myself did find a little strange at first, but I did soon grow to love it. Both titles at the time just seemed to be labelled as average at best, middle of the road titles, and these were reflected in the scores. Both games would receive, 6.5 out of 10, 74%, that kind of thing. Now on my channel I really enjoy looking at titles that were frowned upon at the time and want to really give both games a thorough playthrough to give it my overall verdict and see if they are really that average or if they are just misunderstood hidden gems. Okay, so this is going to be quite a long video, so grab yourself a beverage of your choice, lock your doors, turn off all your lights and let's get started.
October 30th, 2001, 2100 hours.
Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare is a 3D platform survival horror adventure game that allows you to play as one of two characters, either long-haired trenchcoat wearing Edward Carnby, who is armed right away with a cool revolver, or Aline Sedrak, a university professor who looks and sounds a little like Dana Scully from the X-Files and is probably more used to sitting in a professor's lounge marking students' papers, but her speciality is deciphering ancient texts, and she will prove to be invaluable on this adventure. So who should you play as? Well, I would say play as Edward. He has a gun, and in that I mean not just your bog standard Beretta, but he starts with an awesome revolver which will definitely make anyone's day. Whereas poor Aline starts the game weaponless, and although she does pick up weapons a little bit later, she does already know how to rock a ponytail. I just wish she could use it to pick up objects and hurl them at her baddies Dixie Kong style. I know, I've been playing too much Donkey Kong Country. Anyway, both characters have been persuaded and ordered by Edward's boss Frederick Johnson to go to the eerie Shadow Island. Carnby is on a mission of revenge as his partner and fellow investigator Charles Fisk has been found murdered just off the coast of the island. Fisk was on the hunt for 3 mystical tablets that wield great and mysterious powers, but was stopped in his tracks, and it's up to Carnby to find out who killed him and to try and pick up where Fisk left off and find those tablets. Aline's mission is to transcribe the meaning of these tablets and other historical artifacts to help Carnby in his investigations. However, on the plane ride over, Aline is haunted by a strange dream in which she is looking for her father. After waking up suddenly, the plane is under attack from an unknown creature, and with no time to waste, the plane will soon crash. Both Edward and Aline quickly parachute from the plane before it crashes, and both land on 2 separate parts of the island which are not too far away from each other. Carnby lands outside a dark wooded area and must literally hit the ground running, whilst Aline lands on the roof of a manor house and must find a way inside. Now, in order to try and do this game justice, I have played through the game in full as both characters and will be discussing each character's scenario in turn as to try to not add confusion. It would be far too easy for me just to gloss over the characters and do a short review, but I really want to explore the nooks and crannies of this game so I can hopefully do a fair and accurate review of my time on Shadow Island. Now, it is true that both characters' paths cross whenever you play as any of the 2 protagonists. Each have a different experience, which I think is the best thing about this game. I mean, I know the whole scenario thing occurred in Resident Evil 2, but in that game both characters were pretty much the same in how they controlled, and yes, they did have some variance in story, but Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare ensures that both Edward and Aline meet different characters and solve their own individual puzzles, making for a far more contrasting story and gameplay experience. So I want to start with Aline Sedrak because she was the character I chose to play at first. Why, you're probably wondering? Well, I did think that being a university professor and being someone who has never fired a single gun, Aline would have a much easier experience throughout. However, was I in for a shock? Now, it's not my intention to hate on this game, as I'll be honest, most of its problems were solved when I played as Edward, but Aline's whole campaign can feel like wading through mud, and it caused me no ends of shouting at the screen, feelings of frustration and near impossible puzzles which caused me to quit most of the time. So I died more than a few times with Aline and had to really roll up my sleeves to want to try to go back and complete it as her.
Carnby, is that you?
Stay calm. Everything's gonna be fine.
Come and get me out of here. I landed on some kind of old manor. Everything's dark. I'm really scared.
Listen, turn your flashlight on so I can spot you. Okay, worked fine. I can see you.
Poor Aline lands on the roof of the Obed Manor weaponless, and after contacting Carnby, she is instructed to find a way inside the manor and hide until he can come and get her. Having very little option, Aline enters the first window she sees and spies an old woman in bed, Lucy Morton, who is not best pleased at her beauty sleep being disturbed. Aline's whole scenario is very puzzle based, and as I mentioned, she starts the game weaponless and potentially can be killed quite quickly. So again, I did bite the bullet more than a few times, and even when Aline got her hands on the handgun, you couldn't just go blasting the shadow creatures willy-nilly. Even trying to get that weapon was a little cryptic, as it is in a case and requires a key to open. Why cryptic, you ask? Well, most of the keys you get are generic gilded keys that open doors, and it's never obvious which doors they open, so it was pure luck that I was able to open the case where the gun was with one of those keys. So with nearly all the keys being identical, it causes a lot of frustration and confusion as you explore the manor and get lost. taking hits from monsters as you struggle to try and find out what is going on. So Aline's scenario is very much a case of collecting weapons and trying to conserve ammo and health packs early on. Now, I mentioned that Aline and Edward both control differently, and this is where the first problem with this game came about. You see, Aline moves so slowly even when running away from monsters, as she has no weapons experience. She picks each one and fires it like a novice, which I can understand because she's not really a weapons expert. But however, trying to get through doors also becomes a problem, as not just with Aline but also with Edward at the same time, because the game uses upscaled pre-rendered backgrounds and requires your character to go through a door at a certain angle and not always straight ahead. This means that when running from the creatures in the game, they can get in some cheap hits and cause you damage, all because Aline can't move fast and Edward and Aline both have to be at specific angles just to get through the door. The aiming is also not great, and often I would waste ammo with Aline because you have to be precise. Even if you are directly in front of an enemy, sometimes the ammunition misses them or you have to be closer to kill them. I get that Darkworks wanted to create a sense of realism, but the creatures right away for Aline have a terribly unfair advantage, and it takes her a little longer to try and build up her arsenal of weapons in order to try and even the odds. I have to be honest, I hated playing as her because the game just kept putting her through one puzzle after another, and I found the overall experience to be very overwhelming in terms of her character development. I mean, I just didn't really connect with her as much as I did with Edward, and the game keeps hinting that Obed Morton, a mysterious man, may be her father, hence the reasons why she's having these weird dreams. I did find that the developers threw way too much plot at me here, and I hadn't really had time to get to know her or even care about her plight because the game never unravels things slowly, so I got very confused as to what was happening. Early on, Aline meets Obed's ghost, who pleads with her to bring back a special mirror. If she does this, then the ghost promises to tell her who her father is.
Be in the hands of a woman. You found out how to speak to the mirrors. I know what you are seeking, and I can help you find it. I knew I could trust you. Come, have no fear. Do as Alice did. Come to me.
I did find the ghost lines quite funny here, and also a little Herbert if I'm honest. However, before this, Edward warns Aline to ignore a certain person asking for help. When she asks him what he means, Edward answers by saying, "You'll see." So I do think the idea of the ghost was cool, but later on Aline meets an elderly Native American called Edenshaw who asks for her help, so naturally my suspicions were not to trust him. However, Edenshaw proves to be trustworthy, but it would have been cool if Edenshaw would have turned heel on Aline, WWE style, and used her to gain power over the island and then the world. It would have been a brilliant plot twist, I think, and would have been another enemy as well as the Morton family to contend with. I tried so hard to like Aline's game, and each time I died, I tried to think that maybe the next part would show me some mercy. Whilst the game did reward me a little for my efforts, I did feel that it took a lot more out of me than it gave back. It was a real struggle to get through, and that leads me to one of the game's most frustrating parts, which would cause any hardcore gamer to give up. It occurs right here after Aline assembles all the parts of a weapon needed to get through an impenetrable wall that cannot be opened by conventional means. So after running around for what seems like hours, you have finally got a completed weapon. You should just be able to get through then, right? Wrong. In order to do so, you must first climb a bunch of ladders inside this workshop within a large castle. Now, the idea is that Aline must unlock a trapdoor right on the roof, and then work her way back down to throw some levers. Now, the second lever is key in this frustrating, pointless and stressful component of the game. Once you pull it, a 2-minute timer starts to count down, and this William Birkin inspired tyrant creature who has been stalking Aline throughout most of the game drops down for a slugfest. Now, the reason the lever has to be pulled is that it conducts electricity from a huge pole which attracts lightning. Now, when the lightning strikes, it shows up in the middle of the boss room. Now you can plug the boss with your weapon, but all this does is waste ammunition, which is vital to Aline's success later, or you can fool the creature into diving over where the lightning comes from, and with careful timing can fry the sucker. If you can do this 3 times, then he is toast. Now the problem is that the lightning is only conducted in 2-minute intervals. Once you pull the lever, that's all the time you have. Now you can pull the lever again to cancel the countdown, which I suppose is useful. One positive I can say about this boss fight is that the game doesn't force you to electrocute this guy 3 times within the one timer, or reset the boss fight with each lever pull. Even if you have to pull that lever again and again, if you hit him previously, then you only have to hit him a further 1 or 2 times, which is pretty good. Now you would think that after beating the boss all would be good, right? Well, again, wrong. Yes, it's time for the most infuriating and most difficult section I've ever played in a video game. You see, Aline must pull the lever again after beating the boss, and then she has another 2 minutes to get back down the ladder and run all the way through to an underground set of caves within the castle. Now, not only is Aline's speed a particular hindrance here, she moves so slowly, and as the game allows your character to easily get caught on corners, this can lead to a lot of errors which will cost you precious time. So even if you try hard not to make a mistake, the 2-minute run becomes an endurance, as you not only have to contend with enemies blocking your path, but you have to memorise your path completely to ensure seconds are not lost. Your goal is to get to this cannon here with the weapon you had to painstakingly put together piece by piece. If you can get to it in time, then all you need to do is select the weapon and boom, the wall is destroyed. However, a lot of the reason I would always mess up is because of the pre-rendered backgrounds. They can be extremely confusing and too detailed for their own good, meaning what I thought I was seeing in front of me was very deceptive. Honestly, it took me ages to realise this. When I got down this last flight of stairs in the run, I simply needed to turn and go straight ahead to the cannon. Another problem is the climbing that Aline has to do at this part here. Again, the game's developers make you climb up and down in very precise parts of the rocks here. I was honestly screaming at Aline, trying to get her to climb down, but to no avail, and this would force me to abandon the run and start again. So you have to know all this before you start. What's really annoying is that if you fail, then you have to run all the way back up to the workshop and pull the lever again to begin the timer. Aline also has trouble climbing down ladders and often dawdles, which makes things worse. But after much swearing and using pure grit and determination, I was finally able to get to the cannon with at least 6 seconds to spare. I literally equipped the weapon and punched the air and breathed a sigh of relief. I suppose the game did reward Aline after with a crate full of goodies, but Jesus Christ, what an ordeal. As if that wasn't enough, the game then forces you to visit the last section of the game, the fort, where hordes of regenerating enemies lurk, and I was getting so fed up and really depressed. I thought that after all that the game would cut me a break, but no, I was honestly ready to give up there and then. The game felt incredibly impossible, so much so, and this is actually true, I actually explained my problems to a therapist. The whole thing was really overwhelming, and I quickly grew tired of having to collect what felt like an enormous set of items and overcome some really difficult obstacles. I seriously didn't want to give up. After all, I've got a review to do, so I made one last ditch attempt to try and fight through to the end. This was really tough, but what really made it worse is the way the saving works in this game. You see, you can save your game provided you have at least one chance of saving. The problem is that it does let you save where you are sometimes, but when you load up your game it puts you back a few steps, meaning that you have to collect the same items again, input a certain code again, or travel through a section that you have already done fairly. Now I can see how this can be really annoying, as towards the end of the game I tried to save right on the end of game boss, but when I loaded up my game again I found I had to perform certain actions and get to him again. This made absolutely no sense. However, I can see the other side of this. If you are not used to the survival horror genre and say you have got to a section, rinsed your ammo and then saved, you may find that you have made an error and wasted more ammo than you should. So it's almost like the game puts you back a few steps but allows you to try and maybe do the section more effectively. Even fighting the end of game boss as Aline feels like you're playing Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, with the action taking place on a huge chasm. The creature walks back and forth and for some reason will not follow Aline back into the middle area. It seems content to just walk away and then attack when Aline approaches it. This fight took me ages to figure out, as I had literally no weapons left apart from the photoelectric pulsar. This weapon is powered by crystals that spawn all over the fort infinitely, so if you ever run out of ammo for your weapon, stock up on these crystals. Now, a lot of the reason why I was failing to beat him was that he needs to be in the right position to be hit, so you have to wait until he approaches and gets as far as he can, then wait till he ducks down to attack and then blast him, walk back if needed, then rinse and repeat. It does feel like quite a lengthy battle, but keep plugging away and eventually you will beat him. You also need to ensure you pick up the haversack here before getting to the boss, as this could cause Aline to die after the battle is over. Picking it up ensures that a bonus cutscene plays where the creature has a change of heart and tells her to run. Why this is, I don't know, but I wasn't taking any chances. I finally completed the campaign and breathed a heavy sigh of relief. However, now I had to try and play the game as Edward, and after my frustrating experience with Aline, I wasn't holding out much hope for any enjoyment.
Aline, are you okay?
How could I be okay? What was that thing? What the heck's going on here?
At the moment, I've got no idea.
Listen, I want out of here, right now!
Look, don't panic. I'll think of something. Where exactly are you?
On the roof of some kind of manor. I nearly...
Now, Edward's scenario is a different story. He moves much faster than Aline, and I instantly felt like I'd got at least some bang for my buck. Whilst Aline had the luxury of landing on the roof of the Obed Manor, Edward lands right in the middle of the shadow creatures outside and has no time to relax and must survive a series of chases to escape from them. Again, Edward is armed with his revolver, aims and shoots with extreme accuracy, and the game showers him with ammo and weapon pickups. I only started this scenario and was up to the 5-minute mark, and all the frustration I'd experienced with Aline disappeared, and I was grinning from ear to ear, thinking about how much better the game is, and it really started to open up for me. Almost right away I was given a triple-barreled shotgun, grenade launcher, and later a Resident Evil style rocket launcher. I want to say that I do feel I have heaped teaspoons of negativity towards Aline, but the scenario did at least teach me to be extremely cautious and observant. That's not to say that I didn't struggle with Edward a few times. Again, one major flaw this game has is that its puzzles are often too cryptic and complex for their own good. I mean, how was I supposed to know that I had to place a wolf mask onto an owl statue or push 4 books in order into a large library? So yes, for Edward I did consult an FAQ for those instances when I just couldn't work out what to do. Things got even hairier for Edward. After vanquishing a very annoying Darkwing boss in the library, he is finally able to leave the manor, but again is besieged by hordes and hordes of shadow monsters, not to mention a really ridiculous zombie pattern which proved almost impossible to get through. I suppose I could have shot them, but I really wanted to dodge them and save the ammo, as I would not be returning to that particular area again. It was through pure dumb luck and stubbornness that I was able to get Edward in the right position after taking several bites, and was able to battle on. You see, if Edward is running for a door or trying to get past an enemy, he runs the risk of the enemy biting him or throwing him. Now, as annoying as this is, it also pushes your chosen protagonist back a few steps. Now, this is a very clever gaming mechanic, as it forces you to fight back and battle on, but at times it can be really annoying. However, I am happy to report that Edward's adventure is absolutely fantastic. I was able to tool up and deal with many of the game's nasties. There were no silly 2-minute countdowns, and it really felt like a much more immersive and exciting experience. Even the trip to the fort is much easier than Aline's campaign. I again had to deal with the infinite spawning baddies, and even had more than enough charms of saving to get through. Now, spoiler alert again, if you don't want to know what happens, please skip ahead. When Edward gets to this point here, he has to fight a zombified boss who seems almost invincible. The research I conducted before playing the game told me that this boss is an absolute pain in the backside, and that you have to constantly spam him and then run for a spear. A lot of people have said that he is extremely tough and the creature seems invulnerable. Well, I defeated him on my first try. Despite him throwing me around like a ragdoll a few times, I ran to the right and he soon followed, and then he got caught up in a glitch while he was running into the wall. With this seemingly invincible baddie confused, I constantly blasted him until he went down and then ran for the spear. Now that was a piece of luck. The ending, unfortunately, is the same for both characters, which was a little disappointing, but hey, I actually made it to the chopper. Now you would think that if survival horror video games had taught us anything, that there would be some kind of reward or incentive for completing the game with either Edward or Eileen, but alas no. Don't get me wrong, the ending is pretty awesome, accompanied on the credit screen with an epic Alone in the Dark song, but I was expecting maybe an infinite weapon or even an alternate scenario or even a harder mode, like this game needs one though. All you get is bragging rights, and you know what, I'll take it, because this game put me through the ringer many times and made me question my own sanity as I was pushing myself to get through the fort with those annoying scorpion bastards. So my reward was a nice cup of tea and the opportunity to finally watch the rest of Coronation Street. Again, whilst doing some research for Alone in the Dark, many people commented that it was simply a Resident Evil clone that borrows much of the same core elements that made it a success. Whilst I do agree to some extent that it does take some ideas, situation and enemies from that franchise, I did find Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare to be quite a mixed experience. The fact that you play as one of two characters separated by an incident and forced to fight on opposite sides whilst visiting some of the same locations is very Resident Evil 2. But you know what, there isn't a better game it could have emulated. The fact that both characters have to use their torches is a very welcome addition and makes gameplay suspenseful, with the lights you turned on suddenly being turned off by hellish creatures forcing you to fight. I certainly wouldn't dismiss this game as just another wannabe Resident Evil. That's not to say this game is perfect. I encountered many in-game glitches, such as charms of saving lying on the ground and being unable to pick them up, which was very strange. I walked on them, over them, by them, tried putting my character in many different positions, but I just couldn't pick them up, so I can only really put this down to Darkworks maybe wanting to include them, but realising that this would give the player much more of an unfair advantage. Perhaps they forgot to remove them completely from the code. I also noticed that at times the animation sequences and the cutscenes were not so smooth, particularly when it came to punching or putting an item in place. It just seemed a little off. I realised that most of the staff at Darkworks had just graduated from university, so this was their first proper job, so maybe that lack of experience showed, but I'll tell you what, despite these little glitches they did a damn fine job and I certainly couldn't do any better. Again, most of the faults come through with Eileen's game and the problems I have already mentioned, so I can only recommend this game if you want a tough experience and you are battle hardened to these types of games. I will say that if you do decide to give Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare a go, play as Edward first, because trust me, Eileen will make you want to shut off the game. And that's a real shame, because despite me having a horrible experience, I did kind of enjoy her enthusiasm. Okay, so with that, I give Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare a 3.8 out of 5. The music and sound effects are awesome and there is substance to be had. Unfortunately, the game makes you work extremely hard for it. It's not a terrible game, and once you get used to how it plays, then it does get better. I do have to agree with the consensus here. It's just not up there as one of the best survival horror games out there, and trust me, I really wanted it to be. If you want a different and immersive take on survival horror and don't mind its problems, then it will definitely satisfy. So now let's take a look at Squaresoft's contribution to the survival horror genre, Parasite Eve 2 for the PlayStation 1. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this game intertwines classic survival horror and sprinkles it with a helping of RPG elements to create much more of a strategic and immersive experience. Yes, you still have tank controls, pre-rendered backgrounds and puzzles to solve, but where this game differs is that it doesn't tell you what weapons or armour to use, or indeed which spells to cast. These decisions are left primarily up to the player, making it much more of a personal, individual and indeed unique experience throughout the game. In Parasite Eve 2, you take control of Mist FBI agent Aya Brea, who works for the Los Angeles Division. Mist incidentally stands for the Mitochondrion Investigation and Suppression Team and are responsible for tracking down and eliminating neo-mitochondrion creatures wherever they may be. These creatures are many and are hideously freaky, extremely violent and will kill anyone who stands in their way. 3 years previous, creatures had started to appear in New York and Aya Brea was able to put a stop to them. However, Los Angeles has seen a drastic rise in the appearance of these monsters and Aya's job is to essentially wipe them all out. The team receive a report of creatures rapidly taking over the Acropolis Tower downtown, and so Aya is assigned to the case and arrives to try and sort it out. Upon her arrival, she finds SWAT team members massacred and barely alive, creatures running amok, and LA police not really sure how to handle the situation. So just like Edward Carnby, Aya must run before she learns how to walk, and tackle the situation head on facing these nasties. As I mentioned in this game, battles occur in almost a Final Fantasy situation in which Aya runs around and when encountering creatures can choose whether to engage them in battle or not. Once she does this, she can attack using her weapons and spells. Once the battle is over and provided Aya is still alive, a status screen appears and she gains valuable experience, magic and bounty points. The more creatures she defeats, the more powerful she will become. This becomes reflected in how powerful her attacks become over time. Using the experience points that she gathers, Aya can distribute them towards activating one or more of her spells. Also again, her HP increases accordingly, so essentially she runs around an area fighting monsters, buying weapons and armour and trying to solve many of the game's puzzles. Parasite Eve 2 is completely text-based, with Aya having to interact with different characters, most notably her colleagues and superiors at Myst, and also any civilians she may encounter. There are of course armories and shops where Aya can buy and upgrade new weapons, armour and health items, which make the game pretty exciting because there are quite a few of them, unlike Resident Evil and Silent Hill which only really had a handful of weapons. The game rewards you often with secret weapons and items spread about the many areas of the game, making exploration absolutely crucial if you want to grab those valuable items. Thankfully the controls are just perfect, and even though Aya trots a little slower than most survival horror protagonists, I never had any real issues with her and loved every second of the game playing as her. I haven't even mentioned the boss characters. Holy moly, these are some of the most impressive bosses I have ever seen in a survival horror game. Fancy taking on a sinister psychotic golem wielding a giant flaming sword atop the Acropolis Tower? Well, now you can. Or how about a humongous giant blob fitted with a flamethrower trying to destroy a small town in the desert? And my personal favourite is a creature that tries to suck you in Kirby style, as poor Aya struggles to shoot it in the mouth. A lot of these bosses were fun, exciting and sometimes tense, as I would fight them trying to work out which combination of weapons to use, items and strategies to try out against them. I really think that Parasite Eve 2 is a fantastic game, and one which is seriously underrated and overlooked whenever anyone mentions survival horror. I know that again most would say it's just another survival horror clone, but I say absolutely not. This game takes the basics of survival horror and evolves it into its own style, and you know what, it really works on its own merits. I will admit that yes, perhaps some of the creatures could be somewhat borrowed and altered, but having a game of this genre where you decide how your protagonist should level up gives the player a sense of freedom. And again, I do concur that in Resident Evil and Silent Hill there is some strategy required. You have a limited amount of ammo and must use it wisely, and you only really get a few weapons to help you do this. However, Parasite Eve 2 works in the way that the more creatures you kill, the more bounty points or currency you receive, and with that comes the greater range of stuff she can buy and equip. I can see why some survival horror purists may be turned off by this idea, as it can seem like a massive undertaking having to go through all this. Why not just do the same as other games? Well, this wouldn't show any kind of individuality at all, and then its claims of being just another survival horror game would be justified. The further Aya gets through the game, the tougher the baddies become, and it becomes more of a challenge to try to grind to get as much HP as you can, plus the fact that in some areas the monsters can respawn or change patterns, so wiping them out becomes almost a necessity if you want to get to the end of the game. Now, some of you might be thinking that I think the game is flawless. I really don't. It does have its problems, and one of my main bugbears in this game is that I do feel the game does throw a little too much at you at times, in terms of enemies. Whilst I do understand that this is a hybrid game and not your traditional horror experience, it can get a bit boring having to grind some of the same areas again and again. Also, it gets really tough later on towards the end, with tough golem soldiers relentlessly attacking Aya, which got extremely overwhelming and again tough. And don't even get me started on these beetles that bite you over and over again, meaning you can die pretty quickly if you don't know how to deal with them. I can also see that most people might not be RPG fans and would just rather point, shoot, solve and move on, and may find the menu, screens and items very confusing. I know that the first time I picked Parasite Eve 2 up, it took me a very long time to understand how this game works and what it was all about. But I'll be totally honest with you, once I understood the game's mechanics, I really started to enjoy it and relish every opportunity to take down a boss quicker or destroy NPCs with a much more powerful attack. For me, this game is kind of like a slow release, and you must invest some time into it for it to really start to open up for you. The funny thing was, the more I played this game, the more I enjoyed, and even losing wasn't really a problem, as it taught me to grind a little harder, become stronger, and try and use a multitude of different strats to find out how to beat the endless stream of enemies that this game has to offer. It might help that I am an RPG guy and understand the nature of the game, but I do think this game is seriously underrated. Despite it being kind of this survival horror fusion, towards the end I got a serious Final Fantasy VII vibe with the cocoon in the shelter and the upgraded golems, which did cause me no end of issues. I should also mention that Parasite Eve 2 has different endings depending on what you do throughout the game. So for example, if you don't kill the burner boss in time, then it will kill Mr. Douglas's dog Flint. This stops any chance of Flint warning Aya that her colleague Pierce is hurt nearby. However, even if you already know this, unless Flint lives, then this scenario will not take place and Pierce will not be there. One thing that is really annoying is that such actions have to be done almost accurately and with a constant deep concentration on what Aya is doing. One example of this is right after Aya has defeated this massive blob at the garbage dump in the shelter, twice I might add. She meets up with Kyle, a mysterious private investigator whom she first saw in Dryfield. Now there is a secret gate which can only be opened if you have a code, and this gives you a shortcut back to Dryfield. Now opening it up is not a problem for me. For the life of me, I'm sure the game did not want to give me the Pierce storyline. My reasons for this is that when I got back to the world, because I didn't go straight up the rope to find Flint, whom by the way I'd saved right away, and opted to clear out down below before emerging, the game shut me down, and when I climbed up the rope, Flint was nowhere to be seen. My theory is that I should have opened the gate immediately rather than waited. I just think the game is a little too cruel with these methods. I mean, I saved Flint, surely he could have had the courtesy to wait for me. So I had to make do with the standard ending, which is okay, but because of these cruel conditions the game imposes on you, getting the better ending does feel like a hurdle. So that's why I said you need to be observant, because if you are trying to meet the conditions, then it's easy to take your eyes off the prize and boom, miss a crucial requirement. If there is anything I can criticise this game for, it's that to this day I have never managed to get the better ending, but I do live in hope and will keep trying now I have a walkthrough to follow. On the whole though, Parasite Eve 2 really delivers, and there's no greater feeling than having blasted a massive horde of baddies, leveled up, realised you have no recovery, and then being able to visit the shops to restock. I absolutely love this aspect of the game. Now for the coolest part, and this is towards the end. Now I do want to warn you guys that this part does contain spoilers pertaining to one of the endings in the game, so please skip ahead if you don't want to know what happens. Poor Aya has spent an enormous amount of time in the shelter solving puzzles, battling neo-mitochondrial creatures, and also finding out that the shelter contains a Neo-Ark, which is kind of like a Jurassic Park style garden centre complete with hideous creatures and plant life. Why anyone would want to visit this Ark is a complete mystery. Well, it poses a multitude of threats, and I nearly bit the bullet many times. It is here that Aya finds a little girl called Eve, who essentially is a clone of Aya and has the same power coursing through her veins. Eve is being used to encourage the birth of a new type of NMC, which is much more powerful than any that have ever been before. After finally rescuing Eve and having to ensue a tricky boss fight, where Eve is controlling a rather tough puppet stringer boss, Eve gets taken again by number 9, and the two are hidden somewhere within the bowels of the shelter with no trace of them. Anyway, after surviving all this and those damn golem soldiers, who by the way just spam you with everything they have, Aya finally manages to escape, only to be surrounded by an army of them all ready to kill her. Thankfully the Marines have been called in and wipe out all the golems, as well as my frustrations and doubts as to whether I was ever going to get this far. And after speaking to the Marines and meeting up with Rupert, nope, not that Rupert, I was given a rather handy magnum. Thanks Rupert. Aya must re-enter the shelter for a final confrontation with two bosses in order to finally rescue Eve and put an end to this whole nightmare. The first deadly boss is the reactor, and my god, it is just a pain in the ass. Its attacks are way more powerful than any other NMC that has ever been before, as expected, but this means that Aya can get destroyed pretty quickly by its swipe attacks and belly laser, which opens every now and again to blast Aya off the grid. So poor Aya must use her most powerful weapon to blast the belly when it opens, but must do so at her own risk. Every time that damn belly opens, it starts to draw power, and no matter what I do, I always end up taking damage from it. I do advise using the Moon Goose Magnum here. It is super powerful and makes this fight a little easier. I should mention that once the boss fight is over, Aya must immediately face the last boss almost immediately, the Saver, this flying genetically modified female goddess. It's a strange description, but it's the only one that I have. Now this is one tough cookie. She has 12,000 HP, and trying to deplete it off her can be a mammoth task. I kind of feel like Bret Hart here trying to chop down the Undertaker. Anyway, the Saver's attacks are entirely random. She essentially just does what she wants to, when she wants to do it. So it all becomes a case of ensuring that Aya has lots of health, ensures she casts an energy shot and antibody, and just fires relentlessly at this woman with her best weapon. It's a tightrope trying to do this at times, and more often than not, my attacks would occasionally have no effects on her till about 30 seconds later, so beating her is stretched out even longer. Still, after a few tries, I finally defeated the Saver and was able to essentially get the standard ending. Now, as I mentioned, Parasite Eve 2 has lots of replay value with a whole host of different modes to try after the game has been completed. Also, if you choose to replay this game, you get to keep your HP and MP points and even get a bit of extra currency to help you on your way, so the rewards are just amazing. I was nowhere near good enough to play Bounty Mode or even Nightmare Mode for this review, which essentially is the game's hardest setting, but I still had a fantastic experience with this game and recommend it very highly. So with all that, I give Parasite Eve 2 a 4.6 out of 5. This is one of the best alternative survival horror titles out there, and one of the best games I've ever played. I just cannot understand why critics say this game is simply average, or just another Resident Evil clone. Out of the two games I've reviewed, I would say play this rather than Alone in the Dark. Only play Alone in the Dark if you're after a really tough challenge, but as I said, with Parasite Eve 2, you will not be disappointed. There are tons of modes to get through and a fantastic and unique experience for everybody who plays it. Thank you very much for checking out my review, and I'll see you next time for another Retro Game Room look at some more unusual titles. See you soon.